Dick, thanks for being here. We're honored and delighted to have you here. Tell us again, why are you here? You can be anywhere. You can do anything you want now, Dick. Why are you here?
Philly, Philly's the greatest,
I've never heard you say that before.
Yeah. The fact that my daughter moved here a year ago.
Helpful?
Two little grandchildren, cuter than you. But it's always good to see you, Cade.
I feel the same way, Dick. What I'm fishing for, Professor Thaler, is...
you see, you got to give me the answers,
well,
not just the questions,
You did win a Nobel Prize. You're supposed to figure these things out. Yeah. So people analytics. What have you heard about people analytics, Dick?
Oh, a lot.
I mean, not the last 24 hours. In general.
No. You've been blabbing away about it for 10 years. But look, as you know, I think the whole HR area of business is ripe for a revolution. And we've seen a glimpse of what that could be in the so-called Moneyball revolution in sports. And I think there's a long way for that to go. Maybe we'll come back to that. But I think most companies are not paying as much attention to this question as they should be. And so I think it's an exciting area to be in. Well,
arguably you should know revolutions. Arguably you won the Nobel Prize for leading the revolution in economics. And I have an hypothesis that the arc that you kind of led in revolutionized economics is an arc that we could learn from in people analytics. And so I want to pursue some questions that will reveal something about you and your career and that revolution, but also maybe at key points we can learn a little something from you. But before I do that, I want to ask you, because you did win a little prize recently, about a year and a half ago you won the Nobel Prize, and I've been curious, you've been living with this now for a year and a half, and Kahneman won it in 2002?
Yeah.
I remember you were telling me that Kahneman told you the best thing about winning the Nobel Prize was not something personal, but rather its effect on others. Others were really happy about it.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily that he was that happy. So I'm curious now, what would you say is the best thing about winning a Nobel Prize? And is anything about what Kahneman reported to you resonating with you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You make a lot of people happy. Your friends and family. And the same so-called friends that each year would send you emails, this is going to be your year.
Did you not like those emails?
Now I'm blanking on her first name, Felix.
Allison.
Allison, something she said yesterday kind of resonated to me, which was, after coming in second twice, and then finally winning the gold medal, she was almost deflated, or it didn't live up to her expectations. Now, the experience of winning a Nobel Prize starts with a phone call at 4 a.m. So it's kind of just the opposite of the crowd is cheering,
right,
and the landline, which we never use, rang.
Right.
My wife France, who you know well, picked it up, and the headset was dead. So that's how the day started, There are reporters outside your door. But what I've said off and on to close friends, and now I guess I'm going to share it with more than that, I think the Nobel Prize in economics makes economists as a profession worse off. Because, look, it's great to win the Nobel Prize, and if you're having a really bad day, if you want to have something to think about, oh yeah, Stockholm was nice. And they do know how to throw a party. I recommend it, I mean, but the truth is that most people who win Nobel Prizes are having pretty successful careers. And if we tried to measure the increase in their utility, I'm not sure we'd be able to get a significant effect. But, there are a few hundred people that were made miserable that morning, maybe more, either because they thought it was their year or, oh my God, not that guy. Yeah, I think if we had utility measures, I would say net utility goes down. But it's good if you win.
Can we train for the Nobel? Listening,
Yeah, that's very practical.
Yeah, let's be practical. Let's be practical, Dick.
Yeah, because I think there are probably a dozen or so.
Potential winners?
Right, yeah. We should start
it's a good crowd.
training
It's a
them.
strong crowd. I can see that.
Yeah.
You can't listen to Meg and Cece talk about high performance in professional sports, or Allison Felix. Allison Felix yesterday talking about getting out of the blocks. Like, this is a weak thing for her. They train on it. They videotape people who do it really well. They superimpose those videos on her doing it, and then they drill on her getting out of the blocks. Is there anything like that in white-collar work? So, for example, you hire assistant professors into Chicago. Is there some part of their work you could kind of decompose, give them best practice, and then drill them in some way, as opposed to just kind of saying, hey, see you in 10 years when we review you for tenure?
I mean, I think we do a really lousy job at that. PhD training has exactly 0 classes in how to teach. That may show. I learned as much about how to teach from my teaching assistant as I did from anybody else. Anybody who's had a class from Cade will find that believable. We have no training in the thing we allegedly are hired to do. And surprisingly little in how to do research.
Right.
Very little. I mean, tons of classes on how to doing better statistics and reading the literature, but did you ever have a class on how to write a paper or what makes a good idea?
You get it through mentorship with an individual, so now you're getting it from one person,
right.
Very idiosyncratic.
So we do it in a very unsystematic way. I mean, I think when grad students or junior faculty come talk to me about a paper, and by the way, they almost invariably wait too long. Come find out. One of my other students, Shlomo Benartzi, he was very unusual that he would come see me like with a list of 8 ideas. And
before beginning, the idea stage.
These were ideas. And I'd go through them. Crap. Maybe. Crap. Maybe. He'd say, okay. And he would happily cross those out. Don't have to think about those anymore. And then he'd come back. But what I was going to say is the thing I find myself saying more often than anything else when somebody has a paper is, okay, how could we make this more important? And I don't think it's, so I mean, it relates back to not with the idea of them winning a Nobel Prize, but just writing a good paper or having a paper that anybody will ever read or read 5 years from now. And so that's my idea of mentorship, rather than I'm not going to be the one that's going to say, no, you should use that statistical technique rather than that other one, as you well know. Yeah, thinking how to make it bigger.
And figuring out ways to train that in a more systematic way. All right, so I would like to hit a couple of key points. It seems to me from some distance that there have been a few key points that we might learn from as a field, people analytics. You're having led a bit of a revolution in economics. Tell us about that moment, what was going on, and can we generalize it all? The first is going all the way back to your dissertation work with Sherwin Rosen, where you study this insurance problem of a sort, and you discover this big discrepancy between willingness to pay and willingness to accept. In some ways, was this kind of the first discrepancy, the first big anomaly that you saw?
Yeah, certainly one of. And so, for those of you who don't know that story, I was studying the question of how we value saving human lives. So I was teaching public finance, and that was a problem that didn't have a well-established answer. And my thesis was estimating how much you have to pay them to take risky jobs, which is a very rational way of doing it. But I thought it would be fun to ask people a question. So I went around asking people two questions. One, suppose by coming to this conference you've been exposed to a rare fatal disease. There's a 1 in 1,000 chance you're going to die a quick and painless death next week. But we have a cure right here that will sell to the highest bidder. How much are you willing to pay? That's question one. Think of your answer. And then question two, over at the hospital, at the med school, we're doing research on this disease, and all we need is volunteers to expose themselves to a 1 in 1,000 risk of dying. There won't be any cure available. How much would you demand to be in that experiment? And those were the questions I was trying to figure out through my econometrics, right? How much I have to pay to wash windows on tall buildings. And the answers I got were kind of shocking to an economist because they differed by a couple orders of magnitude. So people would say, oh, I'd pay $1,000 to eliminate that 1 in 1,000 risk, but I wouldn't take that risk for $1 million. And maybe a quarter of the people would say, I wouldn't do that for any amount of money, which I don't really believe, but they believed it. So my main reaction to that is, wow, that's interesting. Because my advisor, Sherwin Rosen, who was a very traditional Chicago economist, if you know what that is, I went and told him about this, all excited. He said, go back to your Fortran programming. And
he said crap. He said crap.
Crap.
Yeah,
Crap,
yeah.
right. And later in life, because he never really approved of what I was doing. Later in life, I told him if he wasn't nice to me, I was going to write a book and say that he taught me everything I knew. And that was a threat.
But you pay attention to this unexpected result. Rosen wouldn't let you act on it at the time, but
Right.
you didn't just forget about it, which is one of the points.
I started making a list. Started making a list of dumb stuff people do. And I used to bore my friends with these. There's the famous story of the cashews, where I had some people over for dinner and brought out a bowl of cashews with cocktails while dinner was being cooked, and then after half the bowl was eaten in 10 minutes, grabbed it and hid it in the kitchen. And and I came back, and everybody was happy. But then it was a group of econ grad students, so they started analyzing and realized they weren't allowed to be happy because we know more choices are always better. And before we had the choice of eating nuts or not, and now we didn't. So we're not allowed to be happy, but we are happy. Okay, put that on the list. We're moving to cashews. And
So you did more than talk with your friends about these stories. Eventually, and I think
mostly no. I mean, initially it was just making this list because I didn't know what else to do. The economists, what are you going to do? Study cashews and then see if it's better for pistachios? I mean, so no, and there was no roadmap on how to think about those kinds of things or how to study them or what. So
how did that change when you started publishing so you started publishing this regular column at the back of an econ journal called Anomalies.
Yeah.
So basically now instead of talking about these things with your friends, you're putting them out there in the professional community.
Yeah, well, this is like 10 years later. So by this time, I and others had started to figure out how to collect data. And I mean, my big breakthrough, as I always say, was that I discovered these two unknown Israeli psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Now, people dispute this claim of discovery.
You don't get credit for Kahneman?
Neither of them. They said, well, they already were there. But, there's Columbus, right? Right? So
Columbus totally gets credit for America. Totally.
Totally, and I think I should get at least as much credit.
Yeah, it's
like a
reasonable.
day.
You get a day.
I should get a day, and but I don't. But anyway, I discovered their work because a guy called Baruch Fischoff, I met him and he told me about them, and they were doing something similar in psychology, in the sense that they were studying mistakes people were making. And I learned a lot from reading their papers, and then I learned even more. So, I mean, I just picked up and I stalked them, actually. I learned they were going to be at Stanford for a year. They were then living in Israel. And I made it my business to spend a year in Stanford. I didn't wait for them to invite me.
That is some serious stalking.
Yeah.
To live at the same place for a year.
For a year, right.
That's stalking, yes.
Yeah.
It worked out okay.
It worked out okay, yeah.
What about your whole foray into finance? What did you learn from that? It was a big chunk of your professional life. I think you didn't know that finance was going to blow up quite as much as it did, and then you did behavioral finance for, 15, 20 years, including going to Chicago. That's a distinct thing. You're battling a bunch of people with a bunch of data and markets, and I'm curious what you learned from it.
So, well, a lot of the research I've done with my students, which is, including with you. So I had a student, a guy called Werner de Bont, a Belgian guy, who was in the first class I taught at Cornell. He was an MBA student. A very similar story to yours. And like you, I convinced him to go down the dark path and go get a PhD. And he said, yeah, sure, he's interested in doing that, but he wants to do finance. I said, okay, that's fine. So we wrote a paper called Does the Stock Market Overreact? And it was a very simple paper. We just ranked stocks from highest to lowest return over the last 3 years, say. We used various time periods. and then look to see how they did going forward. Now, we knew, just like we knew that buying and selling prices have to be equal, we knew that you can't predict future returns from past returns. That was written in the gospel. But we found that the losers outperformed the winners by a huge amount. And we published this paper, and it caused, can I say shitstorm?
No, you can't say that.
Okay. It caused crisis, shitstorm. Half of the finance graduate students at the University of Chicago, I was at Cornell at this point, but half the graduate students at Chicago were given the assignment of finding de Bont's programming error. And so we were getting these papers in the mail.
The mail?
Yeah, right.
Got it. All right. Fax machine, a lot of faxes?
Yeah, a lot of faxes,
Okay.
right. You youngins, you know. So yeah, we were getting papers in the mail, and it was making people really mad. And you know me very well that there's nothing I like better than that. So I said, okay, where can I get more of this? And the reason is that the papers I had written before this made a few people mad, but mostly nobody read them. So over here in finance, people were reading them and writing papers about them. So that was exciting. And so, I mean, people always ask, you know, like, what mistakes you made. I find that very hard, but so
Stretch
you know,
it.
there are
Stretch
so
yourself.
few. There are so few, but one is that paper, that finance paper, was written in 1985. I also wrote a paper in 1985, published a paper in 85 on mental accounting, and I published that in a marketing journal. And I was trying to create a field in marketing, behavioral economics in marketing, which I thought, this is going to be big. And then we wrote this finance paper, and God knows whether anything will ever come of that. And if you had asked me which of those fields would be more successful, I would have put all my money on marketing. So behavioral economics in marketing basically still does not exist. There's a lot of psychologists, but there's a trace of behavioral economics. Behavioral finance is huge. There's an NBER conference twice a year where there are 30 papers submitted. So why is that? I think two reasons. One, and huge data. You know, daily stock price data going back to 1926. And the second, equally important, very well specified null hypotheses that happen to be wrong.
Helpful.
Very helpful. My good friend Tom Gilovich of Hot Hand fame and many, many other, he wrote a paper going back to yesterday. He wrote this famous paper showing that silver medal winners are not as happy as bronze medal winners. I lost it. Where were we?
Finance and data.
Yeah. Tom always says that he's never ceases to be amazed at how many convenient null hypotheses economics has given me over my lifetime. Thinks I have it easy.
Yeah, right.
And you know, I think sports analytics has some of the same things because there are so many things teams do that are so unbelievably stupid. And, so there's a lot of,
Well, this takes us in an interesting direction because
a lot of fruit to be picked,
All right.
low hanging.
it is more complicated, though, inside an organization than it is in a market when you just have to trade an asset at a price. There's not, a competing person down the hall that wants to do it a different way. So you've had some experience now, I've done some of it with you, of going into organizations and trying to advise them on how to improve their decision making. What have you learned from that, and what would you advise, how would you advise this group? Many of the folks here are trying to improve the decision making in their firm. They want their firms to be more evidence-based, for example.
Yeah.
It's messy, though. So in that battle that we've been fighting, and you've done it in some other realms as well, what have you learned?
Well, certainly in sports, if the owner isn't on board, move.
It's fair enough. That should go for fans as well. If you're a Redskins fan, change allegiance.
Change allegiance.
Yeah.
There, it's not a law
That's right.
that says that you have to keep rooting for the teams those Longhorns,
That one's the law. That one's given.
Yeah. So, in fact, I've been disenfranchised from teams I rooted for as a kid. Like, I grew up living in New Jersey as a Yankees fan, and then I hated George Steinbrenner and said, okay, Yankees, you're toast. But yeah, I think it makes more sense to root for owners.
Well, they make a profound difference, and presumably that says something about management in our firms as well, and senior management in particular. All right. What about little things we can do, presuming we have some supports, presuming these guys can take some steps? For example, your work on nudge. You guys published the book 10 years ago. You've been fighting that battle. You've taken, there's a lot of enthusiasm, but there's a lot of criticism about using nudges. You fought it in the policy sphere, but you've also helped people do it in organizations. Again, lots of folks in this room who would like to use nudges. There are entire firms now we've heard about built around nudges. What advice do you have for folks who want to use nudges more wisely? What have you learned in 10 years of this?
Well, maybe the most important lesson is, so when we wrote that book, like a year or two later, David Cameron was elected Prime Minister in the UK, and one of his young advisors had bought a pile of nudges as a nudge, and Cameron read one of them and started this nudge unit, Behavioral Insight Team, which now has more than 200 employees. But when they got started, I figured, they better, I don't want this to fail.
Right,
so I put a big investment into that startup.
You mean your time?
Yes, yes. Yeah, no money changed hands in either direction, ever. But the most important thing, we would spend time going around talking to ministers of some department or another. And the strategy we always used was starting by, what's your problem? And trying to find out what the biggest problem they had was. And then trying to think of ways that we might be able to think of to improve that in some way. And then, I had two things I would say in almost every meeting that became known as Thaler's mantras. And the first one was, if you want to get people to do something, make it easy. If you remember one thing, make it easy. You can sing it to the Eagles song, Take It Easy, that if you need to remember
You're
it.
trying to make it easy for them.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Good.
And the second was, we can't do evidence-based policy without evidence. So I insisted that anything we do, we test. And what we were not doing is going in and saying, we know more about this than you, or we're the pros from Dover, and we're here to help. And we never, there were only 5 people at the beginning, so it was easy to have excess demand for what we were doing, and so we were never trying to sell the stuff. And interestingly, the rather ineffective current prime minister there now, she was Home Secretary, and that was a department that never once asked for our help. And that continues to be the case.
Dick,
in her current.
Do you have any concerns about employers using nudges? Does it change whenever this person is in charge of your livelihood in some way?
Well, you know, I've probably the biggest thing I've done in my life is help employers change the way retirement plans are structured. And, you know, automatic enrollment is, and Save More Tomorrow, people are saving billions of dollars more. So I have no problem with that. Now there are ethics. You don't want to nudge people unless you're pretty damn confident that you're nudging them in the right direction. And, you know, retirement saving is pretty easy, right, because there's usually an employer match. So anybody who isn't joining the plan is just throwing money away. So getting them to at least save up to where they're getting the match, you know, there might be a few people where that's a bad idea, but it's not mandated, right? We're just nudging them.
Yep.
So I feel pretty good about that.
But how do we operationalize be pretty damn sure? Like, what advice would you give them on deciding what domains to wander into? Great, we can do savings. And what not to wander into? I've
I don't know that I have a glib answer to that, but I think that so I've been recently trying to figure out a way to do something similar with healthcare, and there's a paper that George Lowenstein and a couple others wrote showing that people are choosing a lot of healthcare plans that are dominated, meaning that if you choose plan A rather than plan B, you'll pay more no matter how much healthcare you consume. I then learned from one of my young economist colleagues that was true at the University of Chicago.
Okay.
And so there's a good plan and a bad plan, and 80% of the people are in the bad plan.
Wow.
Including, let's say, 2 very high-placed members of the central administration.
Okay.
And I pointed that out to them. Nothing's happened yet. Now, I'm cautious there because am I 100% sure that they're better off in this other plan? No. I'm like 98% sure. If I were the president, I would do some things differently, but that's easy for me to say. There are going to be other things that you'll be less sure of, but then you want to test. It's like the paper you and Katie and Angela and some others wrote, trying to do some diversifying training, and it basically didn't work.
We say mixed results.
Yeah, mixed results. Yeah. I told Cade I used to have this joke that there was this old literature in economics about whether 401ks increased saving. And I used to say about that, the economists would say the evidence is mixed. And my line about that was, they say the evidence is mixed, and what they mean by that is the theory says one thing and the evidence says something else. It doesn't, let's just say the results were not as strong as you would have hoped. But that's why you do the research, and I'm proud of you guys for writing the paper. Because lots of times, if you try something like that and the results are disappointing, you say, all right, well, nothing to brag about here. So, but if you publish it, then other people will say, well, all right, that's not going to solve our problem.
Right. Others can learn.
We better think of something else.
That's right. All right, Dick, we're down to a little bit less than 5 minutes or so. I want to do a lightning round. This was advice Dan Coyle gave to me on interviewing. Dan's a great interviewer. I'm going to take his advice. He assessed you as maybe benefiting, or I would benefit since I'm interviewing you, from a lightning round, all right? So I've given it some quick ones. There's some advice in here for us, which I think might be helpful.
10 minutes or less answers.
Right. A little bit less than 10 minutes. I attempted to array them from easy to hard, all right? Okay, Dick, remember where you are right now.
Yeah.
What would you prefer, Carson Wentz or all of the draft picks the Eagles gave up for Carson Wentz?
Easy. Draft picks. You know, I have this crazy theory that you can win a Super Bowl with Nick Foles as your quarterback. No one believes that. It's too crazy to even think. But, you know, that's a lot of draft picks. I also was on record as saying that the Khalil Mack trade was idiotic for the Bears. And
unorthodox opinion.
Unorthodox opinion, yeah.
Okay, second question. Which would you prefer? The ability to play Augusta National, which you're going to get to do next month, without a Nobel Prize, or the Nobel without getting to play Augusta National?
No, I'll go with the Nobel because, after all, the Nobel is how I got the Augusta invitation.
I know that's the right answer, Dick, but I'm not sure it's your true answer. So, okay, here's some advice for us. You can only drink one more bottle of wine in your life. I'm sorry to be the bearer of that news. And you can't spend more than $100 on it. What do you buy?
Scotch.
That's a good answer. All right, we're gonna wrap up, and I want
short, right?
No, it's good, really good. Lightning round, that's perfect. Look, you know, you reach a stage in your life. You used to talk about these guys would come to Chicago and they'd give an old man talk. And you're like, we don't want an old man talk. We want like a real talk. So we can ask you old man questions now.
Yeah.
So we had dinner a few years ago in New Haven, and we were with a friend named Nick Barbaras. And late in the dinner and late in the evening, Nick kind of pushed his chair back. Nick's my age, basically, and said, tell us something wise, Dick. And you were just kind of up for this. You just kind of leaned back and you gave us a little old man wisdom. So I'm curious, Dick, tell us something wise.
I think we're out of time. So tell them something. I mean, I've been telling you wise stuff for 24 years, and well, let's not go down that path. But all right. So look, I would say whenever somebody says that's not the way we do things around here, don't stop. I mean, I think that's like in the story of my life, is me asking, really, we're going to assume that everybody in the world is smarter about economics than the smartest economist. That doesn't seem like it makes any sense. But that was the way to do it. And so, I decided to, after that year of stalking Kahneman and Tversky, I decided to try to make a career doing that. But if you had asked me what was the chance that would work, I would have said maybe 20%. Work meaning I'd get tenure at some research university and be able to make a living doing behavioral economics. I figured that it was more likely that I would have to leave academia and go do something else. Maybe start Huma or Humu. I would have beat you guys by 40 years. But luckily, things worked out.
Yeah.
I think people are way too risk averse with their careers. The lesson from Dan Gilbert's research is that people way overestimate how bad outcomes will be. And really bad stuff happens, then a couple years later, you're back at 90% of where you. So what's the lesson from that? Take risks. What's the worst that can happen? You should ask yourself that question. I don't want to become a helicopter pilot because the worst that could happen, is pretty bad. But, not making it as an academic would not have been the end of the world. I would have figured out something else to do.
Terrific. Great word to end on. Dick, thanks for taking the time to be with us. Very much appreciated. Thank you.